is that it does have the first identifiable pottery complex in the world. So, Jamon, it actually means cord marking. And cord marking just is you take some kind of twine-ish looking thing and you just impress it into damp clay before it's fired. And that's what cord marking is. Some of the other decorations that we find are linear band relief, appliques, and nail impressions. So in this particular figurine, you can see applique. A nail impression is exactly what it sounds like. You take your fingernail and stick it into the clay. Now, over time, the potter becomes much more sophisticated in technology and decoration, and again, we do eventually start to see figurines here. So, we do see residential stability with the Jamon cultures as early as 9500 BP, semi-subterranean pit houses. We see evidence of deep shell middens, and middens are simply like trash accumulations. So we know they were doing quite a bit of shellfish gathering, oysters, clams, and so forth. In fact, we do start to see marine resources become a major economic activity. There's wild hunting. We see birds and mammals, so dogs, dolphin, boar, hare, all things that we find in the middens. And we also find evidence of plant use. And what's interesting is that it does look like the Jamon folks did seasonal rounds, so following things as they came into season. The peak of the culture is around 5600 to 4500 BP. It's referred to as the Middle Jamon. And here we start to find the emergence of small storage pits between houses, so interpreted as sharing of resources, so still relatively egalitarian here. And we know that they were using tubers, nuts, seeds, and other things because there's a changing relationship with plants. We do find lots of mortars. We find abraded pebbles, which we believe we're using for hand stones. We find these stones that are kind of hoe-like. And then we find some deep pots, which some people think were used for boiling. So, again, some changing interaction with plants going on. Now, we also find in some of the structures a specially prepared area. It's kind of set apart from the rest of the living area, but even though it's still a part of it. And we have interpreted these as household altars, or at least offering places. So generally see two large ceramic urns that are buried in the floor with paving stones around them. So we have these large flat stones. So it looks like it's very carefully prepared, and we also find caches of broken figurines of humans and polished stone axes. So it does seem like it was a special place, so some indication of a material belief. One of the other interesting things about the Jamon is that it does appear that they might have been organized as moieties. Now, a moiety is one of two descent groups in any given population. So Jamon villages are horseshoe-shaped, and they look like they're segregated into two areas right down the middle. So you have communal structure on periphery of the village, and then you have on each side your pit houses with stone-lined hearths. They're kept very, very clean. But again, we only find pottery of two different styles, and they're always on one side or the other. So some evidence of a moiety there. So the Jamon again lasts until about 3000 BP when we start to see rice introduced into the area. And then we find around 2300 years ago the Yayoi culture emerge, which is based solely on rice farming, but we do see some wheat and barley. The settlements are surrounded by moats or defensive ditches, so some evidence of conflict. The burial population indicates that there are people immigrating, which might be part of the reason for conflict. But you can see the structures are very much like they were with the Jamon. We do start to find stone arrowheads. They dominate the lithic assemblage. We find watchtowers. We find ritual pottery deposits we find tombs that are now mounded, and we find a variety of materials for tools now. In addition to stone, we have wooden tools like rakes, hoes, spades, and even forks. We find quite a wide range of pottery styles here. And we also start to find spindle whorls, which has made some people suggest that silk production was starting to become important. So again, very, very brief introduction to the Jomon culture and the Yayoi. And we're going to move on to China. And again, this is for time constraints. We don't have the time to go through this in great depth. So again, we're going to kind of skip the early Holocene cultures of China. Some of them are the Yangzhou, which is this area here. We have the Lingzhou, which we're actually going to talk a little bit about. And then over here, you have the Longshan, which we'll also spend a little bit of time talking about. So here's just some of the cultures as they emerge. Again, we're not going to look at the Paleolithic, and we're not going to look at the early Holocene. We're going to start right here with the Lingzhou. So we see this emerge around 6700 BP, last until about 4250 BP. We find irrigated rice agriculture at this point. So somebody's in charge, somebody's organizing that particular labor. We do find domesticated animals. We do find evidence of occupational specialization, and again, some of it does seem to be around silk production. We find fired ceramics. So here's a little example of some fired ceramics. We find lacquerware, which just means it's kind of shiny looking. We're actually going to see some lacquerware here when we look at the next culture. We find works in jade that are starting to show up. We find evidence of wooden boats and oars. And in the burials, there is some evidence of ritual. So you can see in this burial here, we have objects. These are actually jade rings that are very particularly placed. So evidence, at least, of care going into the burials here. Something special going on. We also find spirit temples, or Ni Liang. I probably mispronounced that, but oh well, that's the way it goes. And these are interpreted as spirit temples. So we do find clay figurines with these, often of women, sometimes of dragons, sometimes birds. We do see this face start to pop up as a familiar motif. So again, we're starting to see some new things pop up. We're seeing differential treatment in burials, so we are starting to see that social changes are occurring and becoming less egalitarian. Now the Longshan from 5000 to 4000 BP, we do start to see significant differential treatment of the dead. So really clear-cut social orders here, social hierarchies. Here's an example of lacquerware. You can see here it's a nice black, shiny kind of pot. And that is one of the things the Longshan is known for. We start to see the use of bronze during this time frame. Some of the pottery has what's called pre-Chinese symbols, so some incipient writing for this area. We find sacrificed people in burials, so again, some differences in status going on here. We find defensive walls, and these are in the form of stamped earth, was exactly what it sounds like. You just pile up dirt and you stamp it down until it's really hard. And we do find a lot of large settlements during the Longshan period. The other thing that's kind of interesting about this period is one of the things that shows up for the first time is oracle bones, and these are a divination tool. So bones are heated after they're written on, and then the cracking is interpreted to foretell the future. And these become pretty popular from there on out. You might be wondering why I have a pig here in this particular picture. Well, it does look like pigs might have been a symbol of wealth, because we don't find pig bones in all of the residential structures. We only find them in some. So pigs as a form of wealth.